prodigal son, the most popular parable in the Bible. I know that was a long reading, but it was worth it. It was worth it. That is an absolutely timeless story. I'm sure most of you are aware that story is about forgiveness. It's about admitting your fault and reconciling with God. There's more to the story than that, but I'd say that's the central message that Christ was trying to get across. So before we go any further, I'd like to share a little something extra with you. A little blurb from a book called I Wasn't Dead When I Wrote This. Advice given in the nick of time by Lisa Marie Calderon Stewart. It was written by a woman very shortly before she succumbed to cancer. Beautiful book, absolutely beautiful book. And in one chapter, she talks about how important forgiveness is in the context of two sisters, twins actually, that she knew. So you may consider this a what-if story. What if the prodigal son was like the older son, and these two brothers just were angry with each other, forever? So without further ado, page 142. There were once two sisters who hadn't spoken to each other in more than 5 years. Nicole and Natalie were close growing up. They weren't identical twins. In fact, Nicole was more attractive, more athletic, and smarter. It was actually kind of embarrassing for Natalie as a child. People often said things like, "You two are twins? You don't even look like sisters." She heard the whisperings, "Too bad Natalie didn't turn out more like Nicole." They never knew their dad. They lived with a single mom. Natalie always felt that Nicole was the favored one, and why not? Nicole was a varsity athlete, straight-A student, and always had a boyfriend. Natalie had no boyfriends, hated sports, and earned more C's than B's. Nicole went to college, went to pharmacy school, got married, and had several gorgeous children. Their mom developed muscular sclerosis and needed constant help, so Natalie stayed home and took care of her. She had a part-time job with flexible hours, so she didn't mind. She knew Nicole had her hands full with her young family. When their mom died, she left the house and much more money to Natalie, and Nicole was outraged. Even though Natalie became the favored daughter by staying home and giving everything to care for their mom, Nicole still expected their mother to be fair and give them an equal amount of money. She couldn't help thinking that Natalie had somehow manipulated the situation. Their mom knew what she was doing. Natalie had no idea about her mother's will. But their mom knew that Nicole had everything going for her, with a husband, a great career, lots of money, and tons of friends. Natalie had nothing, still no boyfriend, a job at a coffee shop, and her whole adult life was spent taking care of her mother. Her mother wanted her to have the money she needed to finally go to college and start enjoying life. She already paid for Nicole's college, grad school, and wedding. Why shouldn't Natalie get the same? But according to Nicole, it was not the same. Natalie got almost everything her mother had left. The whole family is still broken about this. Neither of the twins will come to any family gatherings for fear that the other twin will show up. They've missed Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas parties, weddings, baptisms, and even funerals for 5 years. Both sisters feel as if the other one was the favored one, and neither can forgive her twin for what had happened. I'd say that's a pretty common story about a family feuding over money. I'm willing to bet some of you found that story kind of familiar. I'm a priest. I know how common this happens. Now, the rest of that chapter is basically about how either of these sisters could put an end to that pattern at absolutely any time. But one or both of the sisters just had to let go of being right. Because there are plenty of people in the world who are willing to reconcile with someone on the condition that that other person comes to their senses and admits their fault, that they were wrong the whole time. Sorry, that's not what Jesus proclaimed. If you just have to be right, it's probably going to be at the expense of reconciliation. And I admit it, sometimes you're right. Sometimes you have a moral obligation to stand for something that's truly wrong. If someone wants to reconcile with you about whether or not it's okay to drink and drive, well, yeah, your hands are pretty tied. You're right and they're wrong. But that's not reconciliation. That's something else. And I think we all know that a case that black and white is remarkably rare. More often than not, you have something to apologize for. You have some way to be more thoughtful of other people than you were before. And that's absolutely true for Natalie and Nicole. You can probably make the argument that there's more blame on Nicole's shoulders. But if you listen to that story closely, there's plenty of blame to go around. Natalie gets her share of what happened. What makes the younger son the prodigal son is his willingness to admit his fault and apologize to his dad. That is so much more important than any crime or sin that might be on his shoulders. That is what's so terribly critical about it all. Of course, to be fair, he couldn't do that until he hit rock bottom. Some people need that, you know? Some people need to go through that before they come to their senses. However, I don't recommend that. Mercy and forgiveness should not be last-ditch efforts for when every other option has been exhausted. Letting go of the pride of being right is something we can practice every day of our lives. And it's true, none of us are going to manage 100% perfection when it comes to mercy and all that, but every time we genuinely, authentically reconcile with God and one another, we mold ourselves just a little bit more in the image of Christ. And on that note, I think I'm going to let Lisa Marie take us home with her final paragraph from that chapter. I wish I could protect you from anyone who might hurt you, but I can't. Life is too brutal. There is no way to avoid suffering. Learning how to forgive is a daunting skill to acquire. But I do promise you this: the more you forgive, even in the small ways, the easier and less painful it becomes. Then someday, when you are faced with an unspeakable tragedy, you may be up to the impossible task of forgiveness.